Welcome, Matt.
Okay.
You're logging in as me.
Domain calls
Hey.
No? You know, last time I sat there, Debbie, and I filmed the back of Vicky's head for the entire thing, and we just posted the audio because it was like, why am I doing this? But I did it for 50 minutes, so.
Okay, for those people that I don't know, I'm Nick Cummings. I'm from the Office of Equal Opportunity and Human Resources. And I was invited to talk a little bit about the HRPs that we have in ODS. I'll briefly go over some sort of general things about the HR ODS views that I get commonly asked about. And I'll briefly go through each of the common ones that people have access to or want access to. And then mostly I just kind of want to open up for questions though. I'm sure there's some questions people have about our views. They're a little bit confusing, and obviously there's a project right now in the works to revisit all this and retool it. So if you have requests or suggestions, now would be a good time actually, 'cause we can take that into consideration in the near future, I think.
So Nick, can I interrupt you there?
Yeah,
When
yeah.
you say a project going on, are you referring to the fact that we've formed the Data Governance Committee and that we're going to evaluate how ODS data and a lot of our ERP data is going to be used across campus?
Yes.
Okay, so a lot of people in this room don't know that. They,
Oh,
they may
okay.
not be aware that we have this initiative underway. So,
Okay, great. Thanks for explaining.
okay.
I wasn't sure how informed this group was. Okay.
Well, this is our
So-
forum to inform them all.
Yeah,
So-
okay. How often does this group meet?
Once every other month.
Every other month, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And this is probably what, our 5th or so meeting? Something like
Okay.
that.
and so you represent colleges and departments and do help your departments create reports and things like that? Okay.
And Nick, we kind of specialize in topics. Last couple of topics we've had financial data, and then the very last one was student data.
Okay.
So we're really covering the last of the ERP systems, which is our HR system. But we put an agenda out so people, the student people may not have as much interest in HR, but we do have student people here today.
Okay. And a lot of this, it's easiest to talk about it in terms of the Oracle system itself. So how many people play around in Oracle and have Oracle access? Oh, good. All right. So you'll know what I'm talking about sometimes. That's great. So let me know as I go if you have any questions at all. Just some general tips on these ODS views. A lot of them combine the person records, the person information, and the assignment records. And so you'll see a lot of prefixes of PER for what comes off of the person record and ASG, which comes off of the assignment record. And one of the things that I think people find confusing, I'm not going to pull up the actual data here, but if I go, so this is current employee primary, just to look at the different fields that are here. See, these start with PER, this is from the person record, and then ASG from the assignment down here. I think one of the things that I get asked about a lot are the different dates in here, because I think they can be kind of confusing. There's an effective start and end date for the person and an effective start and end date for the assignment as well. And that may be a little bit misleading. If you work in Oracle, you know that there are date tracked segments to these records. So the person effective start date doesn't mean either their birth date or the start of their person record in Oracle at all. It's just the last time that it had some change that was saved as an update in Oracle. So it could be last week, even though you've been here for 20 years. And there are other dates in here, like the original hire date, which is a little bit more informative in terms of how long the person's been here. And then the per effective end date is the same way. It's just the end of that segment of the person record. So it may just be when there's a date out there in the future when there's some change to the person. Like a name change, it could be as simple as that. And then the same thing is true of the assignments. So there are multiple assignments per person, and that's reflected in the assignment number. And then there's segmented pieces of the assignment record as well, and those are just the effective start and end dates there. The date that you'll see very often as well, which confuses people, is December 31st, 4712. And that's another thing that I get asked about a lot. That is the end date of the Oracle system. It's just the last date that's in there. So if there's a person record or assignment record that doesn't have any sort of end date, it will sometimes it'll be null, which makes a lot of sense, but sometimes it'll say December 31st, 4712, and that confuses people. That just means that it's open-ended. It's the same thing as having a null end date.
So Nick, can I interrupt and
Yeah.
ask you a question? So if you find a person record that actually has 31 December 4712, it's most likely the most current record, but I mean, so there's a primary key out there, or primary flag for the assignment, because every assignment could basically be the primary one, but just depending on the start and end date is what would make it not at that point in time.
Yeah. So, at any given time, at any given date tracked segment, any date that you date track to, one assignment is primary in the system. And primary means that it drives some things in Oracle. It tells Oracle what to do and how to treat the person in a lot of different ways. And so, for instance, if you're going to get leave and certain elements, payroll elements can be applied to your assignment, it has to be the primary assignment. It also feeds into the EID system a little bit, so that if your primary assignment is something that's terminated, that's what's going to flow into the EID system, and so your EID will be considered in dead lag. It's not going to be active. And so sometimes there'll be some hiccup in the system. One of the things that happens is that people's assignments, retirement assignments, will be primary, and then they'll come back as a non-student hourly, and for whatever reason their primary flag won't get flipped automatically to their new non-student hourly assignment. And so they show up in the system in a lot of different places as retired. And so we have to mess with that in order to give them access to things like Koali and make sure that some active assignment, if they have it, is showing as their primary. But at any different date, one of them will be primary, and that drives a lot of different things. But if you're looking at today's date, only one of them should be primary. Does that kind of answer your question?
So if people are using HR data, they should be aware of how to look up the data by the start and end dates and the primary flag.
That's
So
absolutely
there's certain
right, yeah.
filters you should look for, because otherwise you could get a lot of rows returned and you
Correct.
won't know what to do.
Correct. And I'll talk about that a little bit with the specific views, but this one, this is current employee primary, and so this already, I think the primary flag is actually a field in here. Yeah, assignment primary, yes or no. But that's yes for all of these. This is already reduced down to whatever it is the primary assignment for the person on that date. And this is just as of the current system date. So yeah. So there's only one assignment record per person in this particular view, but there are other records where you'll see multiple person records because they're different date track segments, and even more assignments, and some of them are primary, some of them are not primary, and some of them are the different date track segments. So you'll see old assignments, new assignments, and different pieces of different assignments, so you can sort of look at changes. So if you're running a query out of one of these HR ODS views, it's important to know, am I just looking at primary here, and what sort of date segments am I looking at? Is this just current, or is this kind of everything that's ever existed in the system?
For this primary one, you mentioned the person effective start date.
Yeah.
It may not really be when the person started, but the last time something changed on the person record. Is it the same thing for the assignment effective start date?
That's correct.
And so is there, if in this table or another table, is there an actual effective start date that's kind of a hard date that
Original
doesn't
hire
get?
date.
Well, original hire date doesn't apply to the assignment though. That's for the person coming on, and for the assignment, you know,
So when the assignment, your effective, well, no, that
it could
may
change.
yeah, it
There
may
really
change.
isn't a beginning of the assignment that I can think of. Not in this view anyway.
Wouldn't the original hire date be your first assignment?
It would, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the beginning of the assignment that you're looking at.
No, not the assignment, you're looking at the first assignment.
The first assignment. And that could also be an associate record. So it doesn't even necessarily mean when you start looking at the university.
What would you be using?
There's no equivalent of the original hire date for one assignment.
For one assignment.
Yeah, that's true. There are views that can show you each assignment segment so that you can see what the first one is, but generally those are bigger views that not many people have access to. So if that's something that would be a useful field to incorporate.
That one might be, if we could see the order of the assignments.
Yeah.
So we have that on the HR side, Nick, but it sounds like we don't pull that into ODS?
There isn't a field that captures that. It would be, there's an actual separate field on the person record for the original hire date. There is not an equivalent field on the assignment record.
But both
So-
HR and ODS is that way? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, but you
Okay.
you can query it out of the HR system. So it could certainly be added. Is that?
Okay, so my question was, it is on the source HR system. We're just not pulling that currently into ODS.
Not as a separate field, but it
Okay.
would be the minimum of the effective start date of everything in the assignment. Every assignment.
So one thing we don't have down is a good mechanism to request stuff like this. So, Matt's expressing an interest in this, but, so definitely this audience here should give discussion to these suggestions, because that can help then IS prioritize, does it make sense to pull this in, or is it just going to benefit Matt Smith and therefore it's never going to get a top priority?
Right.
And my suspicion is not that, Matt, is that if you have a use for it, that, other people are going to have a use for that too.
It seems kind of like an obvious thing to have, to me.
Yeah, or maybe it's in one of the other views that I just wasn't sure.
It's something that you'd have to use another view, and you'd have to kind of query it down to that level, which it might be nice to just have as a basic field. Sorry.
Now, is primary a subset of HIST?
The primary and HIST are both a subset of current person, but yes, you can also, everything that's in primary is in HIST as well. That's true. Primary limits your assignment statuses a little bit. So HIST includes assignments that have been terminated within the last 6 months. And it also includes emeritus records, retiree records. And so the primary is more limited to active employees or suspended employees. Suspend is another term that I think, it sounds like a lot, most people here work in Oracle, so that's not gonna be bothersome, but suspended just means that they're not terminated, but they're not being paid right now, basically. So you put an hourly assignment on suspend, and then, but you can reactivate them fairly easily in the future without having to go through a bunch of higher paperwork. That's what that means. Some people get upset when we tell them that your assignment's suspended. They think it sounds like you're being demerited somehow.
They use that a lot with student workers when they're gone or
Mhm.
breaks and stuff.
Exactly, yeah, and temporary employees sometimes have a short suspension for summer. Oh, another thing I was gonna mention about that the December 31st, 4712 end date is that if you pull data directly into something like Excel from ODS, it'll often just pop up as 12/31/12. And so it's really, that gets even dicier to know about, right? That if it shows up that way, you may be completely confused. And that's what I tell people about that when I'm explaining the ODS.
Well, at least for 2016 now, when we were 2012, it was probably really confusing.
Really confusing. Yeah. It's sometimes a legitimate date still, so it's no good. Another piece of this that is confusing to people are the different statuses. I already mentioned it a little bit. I think I have, yeah, let's see. Query here. So these are the different assignment statuses. I don't know if you can see this. But it's a little bit, whenever somebody asks me to pull a report, one of the things that I ask them about is what statuses do you want to consider? And somebody will say, well, I just want current active employees. Well, that's not quite as straightforward as you'd think necessarily. So there's active assignments, and that's people who are fully active, being paid, et cetera. But then there's a whole lot of other stuff which, depending on your purposes, you may want and you may not. These are associates. Does everybody feel familiar with what associates are? They're people who aren't paid by the university, but they have access to email and things like that. Emeritus are emeritus faculty. And summer session are not working. We have very odd summer session assignments, and this is a piece of that, but they're not working. And then we have these initiate assignment statuses, which also trip people up. Initiate means that you really are in that status, but you're in this interim period of a few months before it actually is completed. So initiate assignment termination does mean that you're terminated, but you're in this interim stage where historically what it was used for was we can still enter retro actions for you, basically. You can still get leave adjustments and payroll adjustments and things like that before you're fully terminated. And the same thing with emeritus and retirement. I'm trying to do away with those, or trying to revisit the way that works, because I think that it's outdated, and the truth is we can always give you some retro action if it's needed. So, but it does mean that you are actually terminated emeritus retirement. The initiate is sort of, for most people's purposes, doesn't mean anything. Leave without pay, totally depending on your purposes, you might consider that a relevant status or not. Overseas isn't really used much anymore, but it's basically sabbatical. And again, sabbatical, do you want to include people who are on sabbatical, they're being paid, but they're not actually here? And then suspend assignment, same thing. They're not being paid, they're not really working, but the system considers them active in some ways. It still includes them, and adjustments can be made to them, et cetera. So do you want to include them or not? And then transitional active and inactive means that you're a faculty member who's doing a sort of on for a semester, off for a semester type work. But I mention all this because if you're querying these tables, it's important to know what assignment status you're looking at and what you want to consider for your purposes. And so just pulling in active assignment may not be sufficient for whatever your purposes are. And you can always contact us if you're confused about whether or not you should pull something in. Any questions about that? Just another general note about this. I think every HR table is updated nightly. Did I have that right? I don't think there's anything that's on a weekly schedule or anything like that. I know that some of the ODS views are on a longer schedule, but everything we have is updated nightly. Cool. Well, let's talk about some of the general HR views. And I'm not intimately familiar with all of these, but I'll give you the understanding I have about them. Current fiscal year expense history. So this is by account number and subcode. And it has the employee details, the hourly rate, the earnings, assignment details, and element name by account number and subcode. So a lot of this, I think, with accounting information, you're probably better off in some ways going to what comes out of Koali. But we have it here as well. We have the Oracle side of everything. Basically, there's a nightly feed from Koali, or to Koali from Oracle with all of the labor distribution that occurs in Oracle, but then all of the accounting really happens in KFS. So what we have is slightly limited, but it shows what we push to Koali.
So Joe, is there a correlation? I'm not, I've worked with the KFS system, and I'm not familiar with that subcode. Does any of the BFS people, is there
Same as object code.
object
In
code?
quality, it's object code, and
Okay.
in HR, it's still called subcode.
Thank you, Debbie.
Not to be confused with sub-account, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So you're going to change the name on the HR side to match quality?
Yeah, don't mess anything up. Job account by month. This is a weird view. It has assignment by month. So for each assignment, there's a different column for each month of the year. So it has January, February, etc. And for each one of those months, it has salary, FTE, and fringe. So January salary, January FTE, January, February, blah, 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 and then it has them totaled for the current fiscal year. And I don't know, one of the things that I'm really curious about, and maybe I can get some idea of this from this group, is when we go through this new project, the data governance project, is what we're going to find in terms of who actually uses these views.
I use
I
that
use
one.
this one a lot.
Do you really?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Because this one shows actual staffing, whereas the previous one, expense, is only expense. So if I want to see if somebody's at least currently set up to be staffed for the entire year,
Right.
including from today, February, March, April, May, then I can capture that using this table.
Okay.
The downside of this table is it doesn't include the employee names, so if there's employees hitting my accounts, all I can see is the CSU ID number. I don't know their names.
Got it.
If they're coming from another department, I
Right.
can't capture them.
Because it's not their primary, because it goes off of the primary account.
Yeah.
Primary center.
So expense history actually shows their name, so if there's somebody in another college, I can capture that, it'll show their name, but job account doesn't show their name.
And that's
If
one
they're in
thing
another college.
we're gonna try and talk to you, Nick, about, is there, if you can look at these and see if there's any way that if there's something that we can give them a table that's considered non-VPD, like they don't have to have, it's not productive data, that maybe they can join the CSU ID to find the person who's in the other department that they're paying for, but they can't see their name. You know, if there's something you can put together that just has, you guys would have to tell us what the basic information is that we can put together that's not protected data that they can join to find out. And that's probably what the majority of a lot of our views that we need to give to people too, is just non-protected data like their name and what department they're in and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it always gets protected because you always have to go against current person. So can we build something else beside current person that's unprotected, or kind of like current person that's unprotected?
Well, and current person, yeah, and this is part of what I'm going to be looking at with
So guys, let's
Yeah.
let's hold up right there. So Kathy has actually brought up two really good points here. So one thing we haven't really talked about is Nick is showing us a list of views up here, and many of you guys might know that even if you have access to this view because you've gone through the formal process of requesting access, your view of the data is actually limited. So we use a feature called virtual private directory that says you're only going to be able to see the records of the people within your own department code. So what Kathy just brought up is, in addition then to this security mechanism that lets you only see your people, can we maybe create a more generic HR view that's going to help people for reporting? So John just mentioned he's got a CSU ID, but he can't even get the name with that. So is there a generic view that doesn't have maybe some of the sensitive salary information that we can put out there for HR reporting that we don't have to put the VPD? So just for grins, does that sound like something of interest for this group here? And I'm videoing, I'm not showing all the nodding heads, but I'm getting a lot of nodding heads here. Nick, does that sound like a
It sounds
reasonable?
So, because what you should be able to see, ideally, would be, names and other departments that they're in and their assignments, even if they're not primary, etc. I think what's in that current person, so salary data, obviously, there are different levels of protection, but salary data is at least somewhat protected, just because we don't like to splash it all over the place, even though you can go find it, I guess, in the library if you really want to. But then the visa information is on that current person view, and a lot of the views that feed off of it.
And that would be sensitive information?
Right, because we've siloed race, ethnicity, gender, date of birth, and then in a separate table, the address information and kind of the personal contact details.
So even email is protected then? Even the emails? It shouldn't be, because we have
Email
directory.
doesn't necessarily need to be protected, I don't think.
Okay.
That's
But John, could you help us out? I know that you've kind of struggled to join some of the HR data with some financial data. I think a big one is like department number. Sometimes you just want to know the department or maybe the location, the building location. Could you help us with that?
For myself, I don't care so much about the building location, but if I can get their home department, their HRS department, and their name, and it's very similar to actually the information that's already in the expense history. Those two pieces of information, I think, are the critical ones. If I've got somebody that's hitting my accounts, I'd like to know where they're coming from, what's their home department, and what's their name. From there, I can usually track down more information if I need to by contacting their home department or finding their email. Email would be helpful, but not necessarily.
Right.
But the more it can be data driven, you don't have to make phone calls and stuff, that's what you're saying.
True.
So Kathy, maybe we could take a stab at, what this generic HR view would look like. We could run it by Nick to make sure he's okay with the information that we're including in that view, and then we could ping that to this group. We could send it out and say, hey, this is the generic HR view. Does this look like it'll meet your needs? Is there something we might have overlooked that you think would be helpful that's still generic? So maybe we could kind of go through that iterative process.
You may want to turn off the camera a bit. Are you in the middle of this project, of the data governance project, do you have free reign to create new views at this point? Part of the issue, I thought, was that we're trying to limit and not create new, but reconfigure.
Well, the good thing is Bob Enmark's not going to see this video.
Oh, okay.
No, I think we're always open for discussion, Nick. And we have so many views within ODS. And I think at one point, until we got to our new reporting tool, and maybe even we're in the process of hiring a data architect to kind of brainstorm ideas to maybe do data marts, student marts, employee marts, that type of stuff. But we're always growing the ODS. We've just implemented TIM that added a lot of reporting views. The foundation information was just added. So yeah, throwing in a generic HR view, I don't think it's going to cause any problems.
I think we could probably get it on. It's been wanted for like 5 years. It's been one of the main views that people have been really, really wanting for the 5 years that I know of. So, and it's just generic information so they can finish the report. for you, so, you know, we tried to work on it before, but, you know, there's just never enough time, so I just, you know, we wanted to use this forum to try and have a collective group request it versus one person, so that was kind of more of the, you know, behind of why we wanted to ask for it now, because maybe as a collective group, it's more valuable than just one person wanting it and stuff like that, so,
Okay.
so that was,
And years ago, we used to have it because in those tables, they had different names back then, but it did have home department, and then it had assignment department. And then the views that the employee had as far as security, there were different layers of that. So if they owned the person and owned the account, they could see both sides of the person.
Mhm.
So,
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Well, I'm certainly open to creating a view like that. I didn't even know that there was a desire for it, so this is
Yeah.
very useful.
well, we thought we'd wait, and we didn't wanna, inundate you with all these requests, so we thought we'd bring it to the
Yeah.
forum and let you hear the proposal.
Right, yeah. And there are constituents within HR that I'd have to talk to about and make sure that's gonna be okay, work out the details, but yeah.
And I think, cause like for DGM and some of the other stuff, a lot of the person information and stuff that we're giving out, instead of having to always, I guess if it's generic information and it's public and it's okay, then we wouldn't have to pay you all the time to say, can we give this?
Right.
Because if it's their name or whatever and that kind of stuff, and then filling out all the security forms to, because if it's just a name and stuff that they want and what department they're in, it's, you know, then we could eliminate a lot of the security information too. As far as, you know, it's just, you know, DGM's just connecting two and two and putting stuff up there. So.
Right, yeah. Well, it's, from revisiting this stuff a bit, starting to with the data governance group, it's apparent to me that there's a whole lot of information that is just grouped in with protected information.
Absolutely.
That doesn't need to be. And it seems like it's been separated out a little bit, but not to the point where,
Well,
I mean, there should be a layer that people have access to
Right.
fairly easily without a lot of red tape that,
Yeah.
and this would be something that
Because all the
could be.
HR, everything in ODS for HR is locked down by default.
Right, right.
Everything.
Right. Yeah, I think some of that should be a little bit more accessible. Okay.
So to summarize that, John Stocking has requested this information and he overrides Bob and Mark with this request.
Okay.
For those of you who don't know, Bob's our director for information systems, so we are just joking here.
Oh, we are?
We are.
He is listening to me, I was like-
50 bucks a piece, we won't see it.